As we mentioned, our latest CBS News Battleground Tracker poll shows Senator Elizabeth Warren a percentage point ahead of Joe Biden in early states, though he still holds a significant advantage in our delegate estimate. Our Caitlin Huey-Burns caught up with Warren in New Hampshire, where the race is tight between her, Biden, and Bernie Sanders. But despite her rise in recent weeks, the Massachusetts senator avoided calling herself a frontrunner.
To what do you attribute your rise?
I think it's about what I fight for and how I fight. And then I ask people to be part of it. You know, we've got a real problem in this country, and that is that our democracy has been taken over by the wealthy and the well-connected. I'm running a campaign that gives people a chance to own their democracy and to make this government work for them. Think of it this way. There's so much that Americans agree on that we really want to see happen, and it just doesn't. We want to see some gun safety regulations, but it doesn't happen. We want to see the price of prescription drugs brought down, but it just doesn't happen. We want to see oil companies no longer calling the shots because we're worried about climate change, but it just doesn't happen. Why? Because of the influence of giant corporations and money in Washington. If there's a decision to be made in Washington, I guarantee it's been influenced by money. We got a chance in this campaign to change that.
Do you imagine yourself as a front runner? Did you ever think you would be here?
I think of this as I'm in it with more and more and more people. We're doing this together, side by side.
And joining me now are Caitlin Huey-Burns and Matt Viser. Caitlin is a political reporter for CBSN. Matt is a national political reporter for The Washington Post. Welcome to you both. Caitlin, I want to start with you. So fascinating to hear Senator Warren answer your questions. What do voters tell you, though, about why it is that they support her?
Well, something that has emerged as Elizabeth Warren's campaign slogan is, "I have a plan for that." And it's really resonating with a lot of people who say that they're supporting her, that we found on the ground in these various early states through our reporting. They consistently cite the idea that she has plans for the things that she wants to talk about. They also kind of note that she's got an enthusiastic and kind of positive-looking campaign, is what I've heard from voters who tell us. And a couple interesting things that are in our new CBS Battleground Tracker poll that also kind of reflect what we're seeing on the ground in our reporting is, first, the number of people who are looking for a more progressive candidate or looking for someone who's going to take the party forward and not necessarily kind of going back to the way things were under the Obama administration. And also the notion that Elizabeth Warren is emerging as the second choice for a lot of people.
Yes.
Found that a lot when I was in South Carolina a couple weeks ago following Joe Biden. A lot of Biden supporters I talked to mentioned that they were also looking at Elizabeth Warren as their second choice. And what we're also seeing in this poll, which I think is very interesting, is that more and more supporters of hers are finding her to be electable. That means they believe that she could defeat Donald Trump. I did ask her about that, and she said that, you know, she pointed to her past races that I know Matt has covered, where she was considered maybe a longer shot, or that a woman couldn't be elected to that position, and she kind of uses that to say, look, I know how to fight and I know how to win. So that's something to look for. But what I'm looking for this week on the debate stage and throughout as she rises is whether the other candidates start to go after her, whether there's more scrutiny applied to her in the coming weeks.
Well, Matt, your latest article out this week focuses on Senator Warren's history with Joe Biden. It's headlined, "Biden and Warren, longtime frenemies, will finally meet in a debate chasing the biggest prize of all." So what can you tell us about their history? It's an intriguing term, frenemies.
Yeah, and they do have a long history and a complicated one. Going back to the late 1990s, Elizabeth Warren is a Harvard law professor, sort of challenging several issues around consumer protection issues, consumer finance issues, and testifying before a committee that Joe Biden was on in the 2000s, dealing with the bankruptcy bill. They were on opposite ends of that and fought fairly vigorously on that issue, and expect that probably to come up next or later this week in the debate. But they have different styles, different political approaches, different personalities. They're different in many ways. And philosophically, Elizabeth Warren sort of wants to blow the system up. Joe Biden wants to preserve the system. So I think heading into this debate, you're really going to see those two visions potentially clash for the first time on the debate. All the other major candidates have faced one another. This is the first time we get to see the two of them on the same stage.
Yeah, and on that point, Caitlin, you're also going to have Bernie Sanders up there as well, all on stage, the three of them, Warren, Biden, and Sanders, together on that debate stage for the first time. You talked to both Senator Warren and Senator Sanders. What did they actually say about their debate preparation strategy?
Well, it's interesting because they don't really like to go there with one another. When you asked Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren about the other, their campaigns say that they are, focused on their own campaigns. They like each other very much. They consider themselves to be friends, and they're competing for very similar voters. We see that also reflected in our CBS News Battleground Tracker poll. I did ask Bernie Sanders how he's going to approach this debate. He mentioned Joe Biden because Biden is leading in New Hampshire, or ahead of Bernie Sanders in New Hampshire, and he pointed out differences that he has with Joe Biden. I also asked Elizabeth Warren how she's preparing differently, knowing that she's on stage with Joe Biden. She really didn't want to take the debate there and said that she's, focused on running her own campaign. But we do start to get a little bit of a preview when she talks about the way that she's raising money compared to others in the field, focused on the grassroots, of course, and not doing high-dollar fundraisers, at least in her presidential campaign, compared to some other candidates. So that gives us a sense of kind of what we might see.
Well, Matt, Elizabeth Warren rolled out 2 endorsements today that could anger some Democratic Party insiders. She endorsed 2 primary challengers running against a pair of relatively conservative Democrats in Texas and Illinois. Tell us about Justice Democrats, the group backing these challengers, and the fight between them and the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee.
This is a group that sort of came to the forefront during the midterms, in particular backing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in her successful challenge to Joe Crowley, a longtime incumbent. But they look for potential primary challengers, having political newcomers that challenge established incumbents. And what's interesting here with Elizabeth Warren getting involved is she's typically in her political career stayed out of primary fights. She did not endorse Ayanna Pressley, who defeated Mike Capuano in her home state in Massachusetts. She stayed out of the primary fight in 2016, not backing Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton in that race. So now, in this instance, she is choosing to get involved in 2 races, one in Texas and one in Illinois.
So Warren, Caitlin, is not the only candidate to back one of these challengers. Bernie Sanders also endorsed Marie Newman, but of course Elizabeth Warren is doing so at a time when she's actually courting Democratic Party insiders. At the same time, it would seem to be a fine line that she's walking there.
Exactly, and it does kind of point to that she is trying to make this campaign more of a movement than just about her own presidential ambitions. It's notable, too, that both of these candidates are women. Of course, she is one of several women running for president, but also interesting that this is could become a bigger issue on the campaign trail. And these are the incumbents in these races are 2 moderate Democrats that have been criticized by the progressive left in the party, and so this could be a sign, if successful, of Elizabeth Warren's clout, but more so kind of where the party might be headed.
Well, Matt, I also want to ask about Ohio Congressman Tim Ryan going after Joe Biden's health, saying that the former vice president is, quote, declining and lacks the energy needed to beat President Trump in the general election. I mean, it is not often that we hear candidates go after each other in these kinds of personal terms when it comes to health issues. What should we take away from these attacks?
I mean, I think there's 2 things. I mean, one is that Congressman Ryan, I don't think, realized he was speaking with a reporter at the time. So while vocalizing these comments, I don't think he was trying to necessarily go on the attack, but he was vocalizing something that I think privately a lot of candidates and voters that we hear from this, just concern and sort of questions about Joe Biden's age. He has himself said these are fair. Give him a look at him on the campaign trail and make your determination. So I think as people look at him and his physical and mental fitness. I think that'll be something that comes up, and we've seen that earlier on in the campaign, Eric Swalwell make a point about it's time for a new generation.
Right.
It's time to pass the torch, and so you hear other candidates make more veiled arguments about this, about a time for a new generation. So I think you'll hear more of that than maybe the more blunt comments that Tim Ryan was making.
All right, we'll be tuned in. Caitlin Huey-Burns and Matt Viser, thank you both very much.